Blutsgewild und verfechtetes fanatisch Rücksicht.
Two countries at war, but never technically at war. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about here, the Cold War. The term Cold War was coined by writer George Orwell in his essay, You and the Atomic Bomb in 1945. Another breakdown by history unfolded to try describing a crucial moment in history that almost lasted 5 decades. The Cold War was a geopolitical conflict that lasted for more than 4 decades, from the end of World War II in 1945 until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It was a rivalry between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, each trying to spread their respective ideologies and influence around the world. The Cold War had a significant impact on world history, shaping international relations and the global balance of power. The origins of the Cold War can be traced back to the end of World War II, when the Soviet Union and the United States emerged as the two dominant superpowers. The United States, under President Harry Truman, believed in the policy of containment, which aimed to stop the spread of communism around the world. On the other hand, the Soviet Union, under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, aimed to spread communism and established a socialist world order. The first major event of the Cold War was the Berlin blockade in 1948-49, when the Soviet Union cut off all land access to West Berlin, which was controlled by the Western powers. This led to the Berlin Airlift, a massive airlift operation by the United States and its allies to supply the city with food and other necessities. The airlift involved more than 200,000 flights and delivered over 2.3 million tons of supplies to the people of West Berlin. The airlift was a significant achievement and is considered one of the greatest logistical feats in history. Not long after the Berlin blockade, there was another crucial moment that changed the future. This was the Korean War, which began in 1950. The Korean War was the first major military conflict of the Cold War. It was fought between North Korea, backed by China and the Soviet Union, and South Korea, backed by the United States and its allies. The Korean War was one of the deadliest conflicts of the 20th century, with an estimated 2.5 million civilian and military casualties. The war ended in a stalemate, with the establishment of a demilitarized zone that still exists today.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
The closest the two countries ever came to actual war was during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, which was also portrayed in X-Men First Class, where they stopped the Russians from launching a nuclear bomb. In actuality, it began when the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the United States. President John F. Kennedy responded with a naval blockade of Cuba and demanded the removal of the missiles. The crisis lasted for 13 days, during which time the world was on the brink of nuclear war, but after a tense standoff, the Soviet Union agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade Cuba and to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey. The U.S. was trying to orchestrate different ways to overthrow Castro at the same time. The CIA had plans to undermine Castro's public image through various crazy ideas, but one that stood out was to line his shoes with thallium salts, which would cause his beard to fall out. The plan was to lace his shoes with the salts while he was on a trip outside Cuba. Luckily for Castro, he canceled his trip and kept his beard. In the 1970s, there was a shift towards detente, also known as a period of relaxation of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. This led to the signing of arms control agreements, such as the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT, which aimed to reduce the risk of nuclear war. In the 1980s, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union escalated again. With the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Soviet Union believed that a quick and decisive military intervention would be successful. But the invasion proved to be a costly and protracted conflict, with Soviet forces facing fierce resistance from Afghan rebels, known as Mujahideen, who were supported by the United States, Pakistan, and other countries. The war lasted for almost a decade, and the Soviet Union eventually withdrew its troops in 1989, leaving behind a devastated country that descended into civil war. Around the same time, the Soviet Union provided support to the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, which came to power in a revolution in 1979. The Soviet Union saw the Sandinista government as a natural ally and a way to expand its influence in Central America, which was seen as a key strategic area in the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union provided military and economic aid to the Sandinista government, including weapons, training, and technical assistance. Soviet advisors were also sent to Nicaragua to help with military planning and strategy. However, the Soviet economy was struggling, and Mikhail Gorbachev, the new Soviet leader, introduced reforms aimed at modernizing the economy and political system. These reforms led to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, marking the end of the Cold War. A crucial talking point of the Cold War was the nuclear race. The nuclear arms race during the Cold War was a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union to develop and stockpile nuclear weapons. It was fueled by mutual distrust, ideological differences, and a desire to maintain a strategic advantage over each other. The race began in the 1940s, when the United States developed the first atomic bombs and used them to end World War II. The Soviet Union began to develop its own nuclear weapons in the late 1940s and successfully tested its first atomic bomb in 1949. From the 1950s through the 1980s, both the United States and the Soviet Union invested heavily in the development and testing of increasingly powerful and sophisticated nuclear weapons, including intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, and strategic bombers. Both sides also developed sophisticated systems to detect and respond to incoming nuclear attacks, known as nuclear deterrence. The nuclear arms race led to an escalation of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, with both sides engaging in a dangerous game of brinkmanship that threatened to trigger a nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was a particularly tense moment, when the United States and the Soviet Union came close to nuclear war over the placement of Soviet missiles in Cuba. The United States conducted over 1,000 nuclear tests during the Cold War, while the Soviet Union conducted over 700. The Soviet Union developed the largest nuclear bomb ever tested, known as the Tsar Bomb. It was detonated in 1961 and had an explosive yield of 50 megatons, making it the most powerful nuclear weapon ever created. All these tests had significant economic costs, as both the United States and the Soviet Union devoted vast resources to military spending and nuclear weapons development at the expense of other priorities. The Cold War had a significant impact on world history. It shaped international relations and the global balance of power, with the United States emerging as the world's dominant superpower. It also led to the establishment of military alliances, such as NATO and the Warsaw Pact, and proxy wars, such as in Korea and Vietnam. The Cold War also had a profound impact on culture and society, with the emergence of popular culture, such as spy novels and movies, that reflected the tensions and anxieties of the era. The Cold War's arms race led to the development of advanced technologies, including miniaturized nuclear warheads, missile defense systems, and satellite reconnaissance. I hope you enjoyed our breakdown of the Cold War. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and share.